Imagine a world where the dust of time holds secrets and echoes of distant times reach us through the ages. A world where courage intertwines with faith and quests take on a truly mystical meaning. What if there existed an object capable of changing the course of history, bringing healing or granting enlightenment? And what if the search for it became the driving force for an entire era? Today, we embark on a journey that will immerse us in the atmosphere of the Middle Ages, an era of great achievements and profound mysteries. We'll talk about the Crusaders, people whose names are forever etched in the annals of history, and the Holy Grail, a symbol that has captivated minds and hearts for centuries. How are these two concepts, warriors setting out to distant lands and a mystical artifact, connected? And what's truly hidden behind the veil of time when we speak of the Holy Grail? To answer these questions, we must delve into the origins of the legend. The myth of the Holy Grail, like many ancient legends, has roots deep in history. Some researchers see its origins in the Christian tradition, linking the cup to the Last Supper, the final meal shared by Jesus Christ with his disciples. Others find parallels in earlier mythological images associated with cups bestowing abundance or eternal life. However, the Grail legend as we know it today began to take shape and develop in the 12th and 13th centuries. It was then, during the heyday of chivalric culture, that the first literary works appeared, extolling the exploits of heroes in search of this mysterious object. These stories, written by authors such as Chrétien de Troyes, gradually pieced together the mosaic of the myth, adding new details and meanings. It was during this period, at the end of the 11th century, that the world witnessed events that forever changed the geopolitical map and spiritual landscape of Europe. The First Crusade, which began in 1996, responded to a call for help from Byzantium. Driven by religious fervor, a desire for pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and, of course, a desire to acquire new lands and influence, the Christian rulers and peoples of Europe embarked on a perilous journey to the east. The goal of this campaign was to liberate Jerusalem and other holy sites from Muslim rule. And despite enormous difficulties, hardships, and losses, the Crusaders succeeded in achieving their goal. In 1999, Jerusalem was captured, and in its place the Kingdom of Jerusalem was founded, the first Christian state in the Holy Land. This campaign marked the beginning of an entire era, the era of the Crusades, which lasted for several centuries. But beyond military action, the Crusades had another, no less important significance. They facilitated the development of trade relations, the exchange of cultural values, and, most importantly, gave rise to new forms of organization designed to protect pilgrims and Christian possessions in the East. It was during this period, at the beginning of the 12th century, the famous knightly orders emerged. These unique communities, combining monastic vows with military discipline, became true guardians of the faith and custodians of Christian lands. Among them, 3 great orders hold a special place: the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutons. The Knights Templar, or Brothers of the Temple of Solomon, was founded around 1118. Their primary mission was to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They quickly gained power and wealth, becoming one of the most influential forces in the region. The Order of the Hospitallers, or St. John of Jerusalem, emerged slightly earlier, in the early 12th century, as a brotherhood dedicated to caring for sick and wounded pilgrims at a hospital in Jerusalem. Over time, they also developed into a powerful military force, playing a key role in the defense of Christian possessions. Finally, the Teutonic Order, founded in 1192, was initially intended to assist German pilgrims. It later shifted its activities to Eastern Europe, where it played a significant role in the colonization and Christianization of these lands. These orders, each with its own unique history and mission, became an integral part of the medieval world. They were not only warriors, but also guardians of knowledge and, as legends say, even keepers of secrets. And it is in this context, amidst knightly exploits and mystical quests, that the legend of the Holy Grail begins to take on its most vivid features. The subsequent Crusades, although they failed to fully consolidate Christian rule in the Holy Land, continued to shape the image of the Crusader knight as a defender of the faith and a seeker of the highest truth. The Second Crusade, which began in 1147, and the Third Crusade, which began in 1189, were responses to the successes of Muslim rulers, such as Saladin, who recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. During this period, the Kingdom of Jerusalem experienced its ups and downs. The loss of Jerusalem was a profound blow to the Christian world, but the search for and desire to reclaim the lost holy sites continued. And it was during this period, when hope for earthly dominion was fading, that the mystical quest for the Holy Grail, as a symbol of spiritual victory and supreme grace, acquired particular relevance. Grail legends, which began to emerge in the 12th century, found their embodiment in magnificent chivalric romances. These works, such as Chrétien de Troyes' Perceval or The Tale of the Grail, written around 1181, and Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parsifal, composed in the early 13th century, became true masterpieces of medieval literature. In these novels, the Grail appears not simply as a cup, but as a multifaceted symbol. For Chrétien de Troyes, it was a mystical object associated with a wounded king and his country in need of healing. Wolfram von Eschenbach, however, imbued the Grail with a deeper spiritual meaning, linking it to purity of intention, faith, and divine revelation. These literary works had a profound influence on the culture of their time and subsequent eras. They shaped the ideals of chivalry, extolling nobility, honor, and the pursuit of perfection. And, of course, they continued to fuel interest in the Grail itself, making it an object not only of literary inquiry, but also, presumably, of actual quests. In these legends, the Holy Grail appears not only as a material object, but also as a powerful spiritual symbol. The search for it symbolizes the quest for enlightenment, for inner harmony, for the atonement of sins, and for the attainment of divine grace. It is a path of self-knowledge, a path of purification of the soul, and approaching the highest truth. However, alongside its spiritual dimension, there has always been interest in the Grail as a material artifact. Numerous theories and speculations have arisen regarding the true nature of this mysterious object. Was it the cup from which Jesus drank at the Last Supper? Or perhaps the vessel in which his blood was collected after the crucifixion? The search for this relic, according to legend, has been going on for centuries. The supposed locations of the Grail ranged from the Holy Land to various corners of Europe. Many places, such as the cathedral in Valencia, where a cup believed to be a version of the Grail is kept, or castles in southern France, have been associated with this legend. But none of these locations has been able to definitively confirm their exclusivity. Thus, the connection between the Crusaders and the search for the Grail becomes increasingly clear. Military campaigns in the Holy Land, the desire to protect Christian shrines, and, simultaneously, the mystical search for a symbol of supreme grace. All of this intertwined, forming a unique cultural and spiritual phenomenon. The Crusaders, setting out for distant lands, carried with them not only swords, but also faith, hope, and, perhaps, dreams of finding the mysterious Grail. The era of the Crusades was gradually drawing to a close. The fall of Acre in 1291, the Crusaders' key stronghold in the Holy Land, marked the end of the Christian presence in that territory. This event dealt a heavy blow to the knightly orders, which lost their main base and raison d'etre in the east. With the end of the Crusades, many knightly orders were dissolved, and their lands and wealth passed to other owners. However, the legacy of the Grail as a symbol lived on. Legends about it continued to inspire writers, artists, and seekers of truth. Today, the Holy Grail remains a subject of intense fascination. It appears in popular culture, in books, films, and computer games, often being interpreted in various contexts. From mystical adventures to conspiracy theories, the Grail continues to captivate the imagination. Scientific research has also not ignored this phenomenon. Historians, art historians, and theologians continue to study the origins of the legend, its development, and its cultural influence. The search for historical evidence, the analysis of medieval texts, and the comparison of various interpretations all help us better understand what the Holy Grail is and why it has captivated humanity for so long. The eternal attraction of the Grail and the Cross. The legend of the sages, as a symbol, continued to live on. Its legends continued to inspire writers, artists, and truth-seekers. Today, the Holy Grail remains a subject of intense fascination. It appears in popular culture, in books, films, and computer games, often being interpreted in various contexts. From mystical adventures to conspiracy theories, the Grail continues to captivate the imagination. Scientific research has also not ignored this phenomenon. Historians, art historians, and theologians continue to study the origins of the legend, its development, and its cultural influence. The search for historical evidence, the analysis of medieval texts, and the comparison of various interpretations all help us better understand what the Holy Grail is and why it has captivated humanity for so long. The eternal attraction between the Grail and the Crusaders is not just a page of history, but rather an eternal question we continue to ask ourselves as we seek to understand the past and find our place in the present. Origins of the legend. From the Apostle John to medieval authors, the formation of the Grail myth. The journey into the world of the Holy Grail begins not with swords and shields, but with quiet contemplation and ancient legends. Before the knights set out to distant lands to reclaim the Holy Land, the very concept of the Grail had already begun to take shape in the minds and hearts of men. It was a long and gradual interweaving of religious beliefs, folk tales, and literary creations that led to the emergence of one of the most enduring myths of the Middle Ages. Early echoes of the legend often mention the Apostle John, one of Jesus' closest disciples. Some traditions say that it was John who received the cup from which Jesus drank at the Last Supper, and that it was he who collected Christ's blood spilled on the cross into this cup. This idea, although not firmly rooted in canonical texts, found resonance in more mystical and apocryphal schools of Christian thought. It is important to understand that at that time, especially in early Christianity, there were many different interpretations and traditions, not always recorded in official church documents. People passed them on orally, and these stories gradually acquired details and symbolism. However, the Grail legend truly flourished in the 12th century, when it became a central element of chivalric romances. One of the first and most influential authors to address this theme was Chrétien de Troyes. His work, Perceval, or The Tale of the Grail, written around 1180 years ago, is considered the starting point for the entire subsequent tradition. Chrétien describes the Grail as a mysterious object that brings bliss and healing, but its precise description remains somewhat vague. He focuses more on the hero's spiritual quest and trials than on the material nature of the Grail itself. In his novel, the Grail appears during a mysterious procession, which the young knight Perceval witnesses, but he does not ask questions, leading to his subsequent misfortunes. Chrétien de Troyes worked at the court of Countess Marie of France, known for her love of literature and art. This atmosphere, filled with poetry and chivalric ideals, fostered the flourishing of courtly literature. At that time, chivalry was not simply a military class, but also the bearers of a specific code of honor, conduct, and spiritual aspirations. The idea of searching for something sublime, something that could bring grace and purification, resonated deeply within this society. After Chrétien de Troyes, other authors took up this theme, developing and modifying it. For example, Wolfram von Eschenbach, a German poet of the early 13th century, presented a completely different vision of the Grail in his novel Parzival. For him, the Grail is not a cup, but a stone fallen from heaven, possessing miraculous powers and kept in the castle of Mongalcès. This stone, he says, nourishes knights, granting them youth and wisdom. Wolfram von Eschenbach claims that his version is based on information received from a certain Guillot, a Breton troubadour, adding another layer of mystery and uncertainty to the origins of the legend. It's interesting how, in medieval society, where faith played a vital role, such stories found fertile ground. People lived in a world where miracles were part of everyday life, and spiritual quests could take many forms. From the everyday lives of peasants praying for a good harvest and protection from disease, to knights striving for glory and spiritual purity, everyone sought meaning and solace. The Grail legend offered them more than just earthly blessings. It promised a glimpse of the divine. The formation of the Grail myth was a process that lasted for centuries. It began with subtle hints in ancient texts, developed through folk tales, and reached its zenith in exquisite chivalric romances. These stories, in turn, reflected the spiritual and cultural aspirations of their time, offering a vision of the highest good that could be achieved through purity of heart, courage, and faith. And it was this multifaceted and evolving myth that became the compelling element later associated with the era of the Crusades and the search for the Holy Land. The First Crusade, which began in 1996, was a turning point in history, not only militarily but also spiritually. It was a time when Europe, fragmented and often engulfed in internal strife, united for the first time under the banner of a common goal, the liberation of the Holy Land from Muslim rule. The idea of the Holy Land, Jerusalem, the place where Jesus Christ lived, taught, and was crucified, has always held a special place in the hearts of believers. Pilgrimage there was considered the highest form of piety. But with the spread of Seljuk power, access to the holy sites became difficult and dangerous. In 1995, Pope Urban II delivered a speech at the Council of Clermont that ignited the crusade. He called on Christian rulers and ordinary people to travel to the east to defend their brothers in faith and recapture Jerusalem. His words resonated with thousands of people, weary of war and poverty, seeking redemption and the opportunity to accomplish a great feat. Everyday life in Europe at that time was far from romanticized. Most people were peasants, their lives subject to the cycles of nature, hard labor, and the constant struggle for survival. Hunger, disease, and frequent wars were commonplace. However, even in these harsh conditions, faith remained a strong support. The call to crusade promised not only spiritual salvation, but also the opportunity to acquire new lands, wealth, and glory. It was a complex cocktail of religious zeal, political ambition, and social motives. Thousands of people, from noble knights to simple artisans and even children, set out on a long and dangerous journey. This crusade was more than just a military undertaking. It marked the birth of something new, the idea of knightly orders. In the Holy Land, where the Christian kingdom was just emerging, a pressing need arose to protect pilgrims and maintain order. It was then that the first knightly orders began to emerge. These organizations combined monastic vows and military discipline. They were simultaneously spiritual fraternities and military formations, called upon to serve the faith and defend Christian possessions. This was a unique phenomenon, born of the specific conditions of that era and that land. The idea of the Holy Land as an object of protection and conquest became a powerful unifying factor, inspiring the creation of new forms of spiritual and military organization, laying the foundation for future events and legends. In the Holy Land, where the Christian kingdom was just emerging, a pressing need arose to protect pilgrims and maintain order. It was then that the first knightly orders began to emerge. These organizations combined monastic vows and military discipline. They were simultaneously spiritual fraternities and military formations, called upon to serve the faith and defend Christian possessions. This was a unique phenomenon, born of the specific conditions of that era and that land. The idea of the Holy Land as an object of protection and conquest became a powerful unifying factor, inspiring the creation of new forms of spiritual and military organization, laying the foundation for future events and legends. Among these fraternities, 3 orders held a special place: the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutons. Each had its own unique history, mission, and path. The Order of the Knights Templar, or, as they were officially known, the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, arose shortly after the First Crusade, around 1125. It was founded by the French knight Hugues de Payens and 8 of his companions. Their goal was to protect pilgrims traversing the dangerous roads of the Holy Land. They received permission to settle in one of the wings of the palace on the Temple Mount, where King Solomon's temple was believed to have once stood, hence their name. The Templars' life was austere and ascetic. They took 3 monastic vows: poverty, purity, and obedience. Their attire consisted of a white cloak with a red cross, symbolizing their willingness to shed blood for the faith. Within the order there was a strict hierarchy. At the head stood the Grand Master, and below him were the marshal, treasurer, and other officers. The majority of the order consisted of knights, but there were also sergeants who handled economic affairs and fought in battle, as well as chaplains responsible for the spiritual life of the order. The Templars quickly gained prestige thanks to their prowess on the battlefield and their strict discipline. They became one of the most powerful military forces in the Holy Land. Their castles, such as Crac de Chevalier and Montfort, were veritable fortresses, capable of withstanding months-long sieges. But their influence extended far beyond the Holy Land. The order possessed vast landholdings throughout Europe and a developed network of commanderies, which served as centers for fundraising and recruitment. The Templars became the true financiers of their time, providing loans to kings and popes. Their wealth and power, however, aroused both envy and suspicion. Another influential order was the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, or the Hospitallers. It originated even earlier, in 1125, as a brotherhood that founded a hospital in Jerusalem for poor and sick pilgrims. After the conquest of Jerusalem by the Crusaders, the Hospitaller brothers also became involved in the defense of the Holy Land. Their official recognition occurred in 1136. The Hospitallers wore a black cloak with a white 8-pointed cross, a symbol of purity and humility. Their primary mission, in addition to military action, remained caring for the sick and infirm. They maintained numerous hospitals, not only in the Holy Land, but also throughout Europe, where they treated pilgrims and the suffering. The Hospitallers' military might was also immense. They controlled powerful fortresses such as Rhodes and later Malta, becoming a scourge for the Ottoman Empire. Their discipline and dedication were legendary. The third significant order was the Teutonic Order, or German Order of St. Mary of Jerusalem. It was founded in 1199 by German merchants from Lübeck and Bremen, who decided to establish a hospital for wounded German pilgrims. Unlike the Templars and Hospitallers, the Teutonic Order initially focused on German knights. Their distinctive symbol was a white cloak with a black cross. The Teutons distinguished themselves both in the Holy Land and beyond. After the fall of the Christian states in the East, they shifted their activities to Eastern Europe, where they waged crusades against pagans, primarily the Prussians. They founded a powerful state on the Baltic coast, playing a significant role in the history of Prussia and Poland. The daily lives of the knights in these orders were strictly regulated. Early rises, prayers, military training, and the management of their estates, all of this occupied their days. They lived in castles and commanderies, which served not only as military bases, but also as centers of economic and spiritual life. Despite vows of poverty, the orders as organizations accumulated significant wealth through donations and their economic successes. The orders became the true pillars of the crusading movement. They provided military might, organization, and financial support. Their knights exemplified courage and devotion to the faith. But at the same time, they also became the guardians of many secrets. Their vast holdings, their connections with European monarchs, their involvement in political intrigues, all of this gave rise to countless rumors and speculation. And, of course, it was with them, the guardians of the faith and the keepers of secrets, that the search for lost relics, including the Holy Grail, became associated. As time passed, the Holy Land, the cradle of the first Christian kingdoms, continued to be a scene of struggle and hope. Following the triumph of the First Crusade, which saw Jerusalem recaptured in 1999, European knights and pilgrims sought to strengthen their position. Thus arose the Kingdom of Jerusalem, with its capital in the Holy City, and other Christian possessions, such as the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. These states, despite their internal strife, became outposts of Christianity in the East, relying on the aid of the knightly orders mentioned earlier. However, peace in the East was fragile. Muslim rulers, united under the banner of Islam, launched a counteroffensive. In 1144, the loss of Edessa was the first serious alarm bell for the Christian states. This event led to the Second Crusade, which began in 1147. Its leaders included such prominent monarchs as the French King Louis VII and the German Emperor Conrad III. Unfortunately, this crusade was less successful than the first. The route to the Holy Land was fraught with difficulties, and military operations on the ground failed to produce the expected results. In 1148, for example, the siege of Damascus, an important Muslim city, failed, a serious blow to the Crusaders' prestige. After the Second Crusade, the Kingdom of Jerusalem found itself in an even more vulnerable position. In 1187, an event occurred that changed the course of Holy Land history. The great Muslim commander Saladin, who had united Egypt and Syria, achieved a crushing victory over the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem at the Battle of Hattin. This battle proved disastrous for Christians. Soon after, also in 1187, Jerusalem fell to Saladin. This event caused profound upheaval in Europe and led to the beginning of the Third Crusade, sometimes called the Campaign of the Kings. The Third Crusade, which began in 1189, brought together the most powerful rulers of Europe: the English king Richard the Lionheart, the French king Philip II Augustus, and the German Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa. Emperor Frederick unfortunately drowned in a river in Asia Minor en route to the Holy Land, weakening German participation. Richard the Lionheart proved himself an outstanding commander, winning the Battle of Arsuf in 1191. However, despite military successes, the Crusaders were never able to recapture Jerusalem. In 1192, Richard concluded a peace treaty with Saladin, allowing Christian pilgrims to visit the Holy City, but Jerusalem remained under Muslim control. With the fall of Jerusalem and the subsequent setbacks, faith in the possibility of holding the Holy Land began to wane. Many historians believe that it was during this period, as hopes for military victory faded, that the myth of the Holy Grail acquired particular significance. The loss of Jerusalem, the symbol of Christ's earthly kingdom, may have prompted seekers to search for its spiritual equivalent, the Grail, a symbol of divine grace and redemption. According to legend, it was during this period, when Christian states in the East were declining, that the Holy Grail, as a relic, was either lost or hidden to avoid desecration. Knightly orders, such as the Templars, whose role in defending the Holy Land was enormous, may have become the guardians of this secret. Their castles and fortresses, scattered throughout Palestine, served not only as military fortifications, but also, perhaps, as repositories of valuable relics. The loss of the Holy Land also meant the loss of control over the places where, according to legend, the Grail was located. For many knights and believers, the search for the Grail became a symbol of the continuation of the spiritual struggle after the earthly struggle had been lost. It was a transition from a visible material goal to an invisible spiritual one. Everyday life during this period was closely tied to religion and war. Peasants, who made up the majority of the population, lived in small villages, farmed the land, and paid taxes. Their lives were difficult, dependent on the harvest, and exposed to danger. Cities, on the other hand, were centers of crafts and trade, where life was more vibrant. However, even in times of peace, the constant threat of attacks from Muslims or internecine conflicts made life unsafe. For knights, especially those serving in the orders, life was even more rigorous. Days were filled with prayer, training, and managing their estates. They lived in castles, which were not only military strongholds, but also centers of local life. In these castles, in addition to the knights, there were servants, artisans, and priests. Meals were usually simple but plentiful, consisting of bread, meat, vegetables, and wine. Special occasions, such as holidays or the arrival of noble guests, might be accompanied by more elaborate dishes. The events of the Second and Third Crusades, despite their military failures in holding the Holy Land, left a deep mark on history. They demonstrated the resilience of Muslim rulers and the difficulty of conquering these lands. For Europeans, these campaigns were not only an attempt to recapture holy sites, but also, perhaps, a catalyst for the development of new ideas and myths. among which the myth of the Holy Grail occupied a special place. The loss of Jerusalem, however difficult it was, did not mean the end of faith or spiritual aspirations. On the contrary, it could redirect this energy into other, more mystical pursuits. As knights returned from the Holy Land, carrying with them memories of battles and spiritual quests, a new art form flourished in Europe: chivalric romances. These works, written in Old French, became a true cultural phenomenon, reflecting the ideals of chivalry, courtly love, and, of course, the mysterious Holy Grail. One of the first and most significant authors to introduce the image of the Grail into European literature was Chrétien de Troyes. Around 1181, he wrote his unfinished novel, Percival, or The Tale of the Grail. In this work, the Grail appears as a mysterious object carried by a knight, but its nature and purpose remain unclear. Chrétien describes the Grail as a cup that can grant food and drink, but also hints at its deeper spiritual meaning. His hero, Percival, a young and inexperienced knight, encounters the mysterious Fisher King, who is suffering from a terrible wound in his castle. A procession appears before Percival, bearing wondrous objects, including the Grail. However, due to his naivete and failure to ask the right questions, Percival misses the opportunity to help the king and retrieve the Grail. This motif of missed opportunity and the importance of asking the right question will become one of the key ones in further interpretations of the legend. Following Chrétien de Troyes, other authors continued to develop the Grail theme, each adding their own unique elements. The novel Tristan and Isolde, although not directly focused on the Grail, reflects the mood of the time, where love and fate are intertwined with elements of mysticism and fate. Perhaps the most influential figure in shaping the Grail myth, however, was Wolfram von Eschenbach, a German poet and knight who lived in the early 13th century. Around 125, he completed his epic novel, Parzival. Unlike Chrétien, Wolfram gives a more concrete description and origin of the Grail. He depicts the Grail as a stone fallen from heaven or as a cup created by angels. This Grail, according to Wolfram, is kept in the mystical castle of Montsalvat, where only select knights can enter. The Grail possesses immense power, sustaining life and granting wisdom to those worthy of it. Wolfram von Eschenbach associates the Grail with an order of knights called to guard it, echoing the emergence of real knightly orders in the Holy Land. His Parsifal is not just an inexperienced youth, but a complex character who goes through many trials, makes mistakes, but ultimately gains wisdom and becomes the guardian of the Grail. The influence of these chivalric romances on medieval society was enormous. They not only entertained readers, but also shaped ideas about chivalry, honor, valor, and spirituality. The image of the Grail, a mysterious and powerful artifact, became a symbol of the highest goal knights aspired to. It represented not only material wealth or power, but also spiritual perfection, enlightenment, and closeness to the divine. Life in medieval Europe, despite frequent wars and epidemics, was filled with a search for meaning. For ordinary people, this meaning often lay in faith, work, and family values. For the aristocracy, especially knights, other horizons existed. Chivalric romances offered them an idealized image of life, where exploits on the battlefield were combined with courtly manners and mystical quests. Everyday life in the castles where knights and their families lived was governed by a strict schedule. Mornings began with prayer, followed by training, hunting, and managing the estates. Women were responsible for housework, needlework, and childcare. Meals were simple but filling: bread, porridge, vegetables, game, and fish. Special occasions, such as religious holidays or name days, could be accompanied by more lavish fare and entertainment, music, songs, and poetry readings. It was in this atmosphere, where reality intertwined with fantasy, and the pursuit of spirituality was reflected in myths and legends, that the Grail romances flourished. They became a bridge between the harsh world of the Middle Ages and the eternal search for something greater, something that could bring redemption and grace. These stories, full of adventure and mystery, forced listeners and readers to reflect on the meaning of life, their own aspirations, and what truly constitutes a true treasure. The Holy Grail, as a spiritual symbol, extends far beyond a simple object. In medieval thought, it became the embodiment of the highest spiritual goal, a beacon illuminating the path to enlightenment. It is not simply the cup from which Christ drank during the Last Supper, nor the vessel in which his blood was collected on the cross, although these associations formed the basis of its mystical aura. In chivalric romances, the Grail represented something deeper, a symbol of purity, divine grace, and redemption. For a knight striving for perfection, the quest for the Grail was akin to a spiritual pilgrimage. It required not only physical strength and courage, but also purity of thought, humility, and faith. Legends told of knights who, due to sin or pride, were unable to attain the Grail. Only those who purified their souls, who sincerely strove for righteousness, were granted the honor of seeing it or even touching it. This aspect of the Grail as a spiritual symbol was especially important in an era when religious quests occupied a central place in the lives of many. Chivalric romances like Chrétien de Trozes's Perceval or Wolfram von Eschenbach's Titurel weren't simply adventure stories. They were a kind of instruction, an allegory that taught readers and listeners the virtues necessary for achieving spiritual perfection. Perceval, the protagonist of Chrétien de Trozes's novel of the same name, undergoes a long path of training and trials. His initial naivety and inexperience gradually give way to wisdom and understanding. His encounter with the Grail occurs not through random luck, but as a result of his spiritual growth. The very image of the Grail in these works is often shrouded in mystery. Sometimes it appears as a radiant chalice emitting divine light. In other cases, it may be associated with bread, symbolizing the Eucharist. What's important is not so much its material form as its spiritual significance. The Grail grants healing, eternal youth, and, most importantly, closeness to God. It is a promise of the highest good, which can be achieved through self-denial and spiritual purity. In the daily lives of medieval people, especially among knights, the pursuit of spirituality was closely intertwined with faith. The Church played a vital role, and religious rites and holidays were an integral part of life. The knightly orders, which we will discuss below, were a shining example of how military service and spiritual quest could be combined. The idea of the Grail as a spiritual symbol gave them additional, higher meaning in their service. The quest for the Grail was a metaphor for the search for inner peace and harmony. In a world full of chaos and uncertainty, where war and disease could strike at any moment, the idea of finding absolute redemption and divine grace was extremely appealing. It offered hope and comfort. Knights, embarking on dangerous journeys, both to the Holy Land and in their imaginary quests, sought not only glory and loot, but also spiritual purification. Thus, the Holy Grail as a spiritual symbol is a multifaceted concept. It symbolizes the highest goal a person can strive for: the attainment of enlightenment, the atonement of sins, and the acquisition of divine grace. Its quest requires not only physical fortitude, but more importantly, spiritual purity and humility. The legends of the Grail, permeating chivalric literature, served as a reminder that the true treasure lies not in the outer world, but in the depths of the human soul. The Holy Grail, as a material artifact, represents one of the most intriguing facets of this ancient legend. Viewing it not as a spiritual symbol, but as a concrete object, opens up a whole new layer of exploration and interpretation. Historians and researchers have spent centuries trying to determine what this artifact might actually be and where it might have been sought. When discussing the material Grail, many first think of the chalice of the Last Supper. This cup, from which Jesus Christ drank wine during his last meal with his disciples, is the most common version. According to Christian tradition, this cup could also have been used to collect Christ's blood after his crucifixion. In medieval texts, especially chivalric romances, the Grail is often described as possessing miraculous properties: the ability to heal, grant eternal youth, or satisfy the hungry. Such descriptions, of course, fueled belief in its material existence and allure. The search for this material Grail has been as varied as the legend itself. Over the centuries, various groups of people, from pious pilgrims to greedy treasure hunters, have set out in search of it. These searches often involved places of particular significance in Christian history. One such place, undoubtedly, is the Holy Land, where events related to the life and death of Jesus Christ are believed to have taken place. The Crusades, which began in the late 11th century, created fertile ground for such searches to become more organized and widespread. The knights who arrived in the Holy Land were not only warriors, but also believers seeking spiritual relics. They may have hoped to find the Grail among the many other holy relics held in Jerusalem and other cities of Palestine. However, despite all efforts, not a single crusade succeeded in discovering the Grail. After the loss of the Holy Land to the Crusaders, the search for the Grail didn't cease, but merely shifted its focus. The legend began to spread across Europe. Different regions developed their own versions and candidates for the role of Grail Guardian. For example, in what is now France, the Loire Valley is home to numerous castles and abbeys associated with Grail legends. One such candidate is the Holy Grail of Valencia, known as the Holy Grail, which many believe is the cup itself. This relic, An agate cup is kept in the Valencia Cathedral and has a long and complex history. According to legend, it was brought to Spain in the 13th century. Other versions link the Grail to various myths and legends. For example, some researchers suggest that the Grail may have been not just a cup, but some other object with sacred meaning. It could have been a plate, a stone, or even a book. Such ambiguity in the descriptions only added to the mystery and fueled endless speculation. It's important to note that relic searches were commonplace in the Middle Ages. People sought to connect with something that could connect them to the divine, grant protection, or heal. The Grail, with its aura of mystery and miraculous properties, became perhaps the most coveted of all relics. Knightly orders such as the Templars mentioned earlier may also have been involved in this quest, although there is no direct historical evidence. Their wealth, power, and secrecy gave rise to numerous legends, many of which linked the Templars to the Grail. Ultimately, the material Grail remains a mystery. Whether it truly exists or is merely a figment of the collective imagination is difficult to say with certainty. However, the very desire to search, to find something unattainable yet profoundly important, is an integral part of human nature. This search, both real and metaphorical, continues to this day, reflected in literature, art, and even scientific research. Perhaps the true value of the Grail lies not in the artifact itself, but in the path it paves for the seeker. The Crusaders and the quest for the Grail. The connection between military expeditions and mystical quests. The 9th chapter of our journey through the history of the Holy Grail and the Crusades is devoted to perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this legend, the connection between grand military undertakings and profound spiritual quests. We have already discussed how the first Crusades, beginning in the late 11th century, were imbued with religious fervor and a desire to reclaim the Holy Land. It was in this cauldron of faith, battles, and pilgrimages that many legends were born and grew, including that concerning the Holy Grail. It's important to understand that for medieval people, the world was far more mystical than it is for us today. Religion permeated every aspect of life, and belief in miracles, relics, and divine intervention was absolute. Military expeditions to the East, known as Crusades, were more than just political or economic undertakings. They were perceived as a sacred mission, a path to atonement and salvation. Knights embarking on this perilous journey carried a cross on their shields, a symbol of their faith and commitment to the cause. In the context of such lofty aspirations, the search for the Holy Grail, that sacred cup associated with the Last Supper and the blood of Christ, became a natural continuation of the spiritual journey. Imagine a knight who, having traversed the long and perilous journey to Jerusalem and recaptured it in 1999, now seeks not only earthly treasures or political influence, but something far more precious, a fragment of the divine presence. Knightly orders such as the Templars and the Hospitallers played a special role here. Founded to protect pilgrims and Christian possessions in the Holy Land, they became not only military fraternities, but also guardians of the faith, and, as legend has it, knowledge. Their monasteries and castles were centers of life in a war-torn region. In these harsh conditions, amid constant threats, the need for spiritual support, for a sense of closeness to God, became especially acute. Grail legends, which began to flourish in the 12th century, found fertile ground among these knights. The idea that the Grail might be hidden somewhere in the Holy Land, or that powerful knights guarded it, undoubtedly fueled interest. Although there is no direct documentary evidence that the Templars or Hospitallers actively sought the Grail as a material artifact during their crusades, their role in the dissemination and preservation of mystical traditions is undeniable. Their secrecy, their enormous wealth accumulated through generous donations, and their involvement in events of great religious significance have fueled much speculation. Many researchers believe that it was in the context of the Crusades and the activities of the knightly orders that the idea of the Holy Land as a place of pilgrimage and the search for sacred relics merged with the developing myth of the Grail. Knights returning from the Holy Land brought with them not only military experience, but also stories, rumors, and perhaps even fragments of ancient legends. These stories, mingling with existing legends, shaped the image of the Grail as something connected to the earthly domain of Christ and his followers. Imagine daily life in the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the 12th century. It was a world where European knights and pilgrims lived side by side with the local population, where Christian holy sites stood side by side with Muslim and Jewish ones. There was constant tension, fighting, but also periods of relative peace when pilgrims could visit holy sites. In such conditions, when reality was full of dangers and miracles, fantasy could easily be carried away by the search for the most sacred relics. In the literature of the time, especially in chivalric romances, the Grail is often depicted as something located in distant, mysterious lands, guarded by powerful knights. This reflects the desire to find something pure and divine in a world full of filth and violence. The Crusades, with their distant lands and heroic deeds, provided the perfect backdrop for such stories. Knights fighting for the faith in foreign lands were natural heroes who could embark on an even grander spiritual journey, the quest for the Grail. Some theories suggest that knightly orders may have used the Grail legend to strengthen their influence and attract new members. The idea that they were guardians of the greatest relic imbued them with a special aura of holiness and power. This could have been either a deliberate strategy or a natural consequence of their role in defending Christian values. These campaigns, despite the efforts of such prominent figures as King Louis VII of France, Emperor Conrad III of Germany, and King Richard the Lionheart of England, failed to recapture the lost territories for long. With the fall of Jerusalem in 1187 to Sultan Saladin, the Holy Land became even more desirable and yet unattainable. It was during this period, when hope for military victory was fading, that mystical quests could be revived. The legend that the Grail was lost with the fall of the kingdom, or that it was hidden by knights to prevent it from falling into enemy hands, could have acquired particular potency. Imagine a knight returning from the Third Crusade, not having achieved final victory, but having fulfilled his duty. He might have sought solace and meaning in mystical traditions, in the idea that there is something more important than military success, something that cannot be taken away, a spiritual truth embodied in the Grail. Thus, the connection between the Crusades and the quest for the Grail is more than just a coincidence. It represents a profound interweaving of historical events, religious aspirations, and cultural developments. Military expeditions to the East became a catalyst for the development of knightly culture, which in turn gave rise to and popularized the Grail legends. Mystical quests, in turn, gave additional meaning and motivation to these already grandiose expeditions. Even as military successes in the Holy Land began to wane, the idea of the Grail continued to live and develop. It became a symbol of something eternal, something that transcended earthly wars and defeats. It was a striving for the ideal, for perfection, for divine grace, which remained relevant even after the end of the Crusades. And it is precisely this enduring connection between heroic deeds and profound spiritual quests that makes the story of the Grail and the Crusaders so compelling and enigmatic. And so we approach the end of a long and dramatic chapter in history, the moment when the era of the Crusades, which lasted for centuries, begins to wane. This period was marked by the fall of the last Christian stronghold in the Holy Land, the city of Acre, and the subsequent decline of the powerful knightly orders that were its chief defenders. But even in this seemingly tragic ending, there remains room for reflection on the legacy these events left behind, including the mysterious legend of the Holy Grail. In 1291, after a long and bloody siege lasting over 40 days, the city of Acre, capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, fell to the forces of the Mamluk Sultan al-Malik al-Ashraf. This event proved truly fateful for the Christian presence in the Holy Land. Acre was more than just a city. It was a symbol, a center of power and trade, the last major outpost held by the Crusaders after the loss of Jerusalem long before. Its fall signaled the logical, albeit bitter, conclusion of the era that began with the First Crusade in the late 11th century. The siege of Acre was tense and desperate. The city's defenders, including knights from various orders, as well as locals, fought with incredible courage. However, the odds were uneven. The massive Mamluk army, equipped with siege weapons such as giant trebuchets, steadily advanced. Contemporary sources describe how the city walls shook from the blows, and the streets became arenas for brutal clashes. The knights, clad in their armor, stood to the death, defending every house, every tower. Among those who demonstrated particular valor were the Knights Hospitaller, who, according to accounts, fought to the last man, and the Templars, whose reputation as unwavering warriors was only strengthened by these battles. The fall of Acre had far-reaching consequences. It meant that the Crusaders lost all hope of reclaiming their possessions in the Holy Land. Many knights and soldiers who had participated in the defense were killed. Others were captured. Those who managed to escape were forced to leave the Holy Land, returning to the West with heavy hearts and a sense of defeat. This marked the end of an era that had shaped the political and military landscape of the Mediterranean for 2 centuries. With the decline of the Crusades, the powerful knightly orders also began to decline. The Order of the Hospitallers, or Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, originally created to care for pilgrims and the sick, eventually developed into a powerful military force. After the fall of Acre, the Hospitallers, like other orders, moved their activities to Cyprus and then to Rhodes, where they continued their struggle against Muslim rulers, but in a different region. The Order of the Templars, or Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, faced an even more dramatic fate. After losing the Holy Land, their primary base and source of influence, the Templars found themselves in a vulnerable position. Their wealth, vast holdings, and political influence in the West aroused envy and suspicion. Less than 20 years after the fall of Acre in 1307, the French king Philip the Fair, experiencing financial difficulties and seeking to appropriate the order's wealth for himself, accused the Templars of heresy, idolatry, and other serious crimes. Mass arrests, torture, and trials ensued. In 1317, the last Grand Master of the order, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake. The Templar order was officially dissolved by Pope Clement V in 1312. It was a cruel and unjust end to the history of one of the most powerful and influential knightly orders of the Middle Ages. The Teutonic Order, or the Order of the Brothers of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem, was also originally founded to assist German pilgrims. However, unlike the Hospitallers and Templars, the Teutons found their primary field of activity not in the Holy Land, but in the Baltic region. After losing their possessions in the east, the Teutonic Knights focused their efforts on conquering and Christianizing the pagan lands of the Prussians and other Baltic peoples. They founded a powerful state on the Baltic coast, which became known as the Teutonic State. Thus, although their connection with the Holy Land weakened, the order continued to exist and develop, albeit along different paths. The end of the Crusades and the fall of Acre did not mean the complete disappearance of the idea of the Holy Grail. On the contrary, as often happens in history, defeat and loss can give birth to new myths and strengthen old ones. According to legend, it was precisely during this period, when the Christian presence in the Holy Land was threatened, that the Grail could have been lost or hidden. Imagine a knight returning from the Holy Land, not having achieved final victory, but having fulfilled his duty. He might have sought solace and meaning in mystical traditions, in the idea that there is something more important than military success, something that cannot be taken away, a spiritual truth embodied in the Grail. There are various theories about what might have happened to the Grail during these turbulent times. One legend holds that the Templars, foreseeing the fall of Acre and fearing that the Holy Grail might fall into enemy hands, removed it from the Holy Land. Where exactly is unknown. Some say it was hidden in secret dungeons throughout Europe, while others say it was transported to Scotland, where it still rests, awaiting its time. Another theory suggests that the Grail was not a material object, but rather a symbol, a spiritual legacy passed down from generation to generation. In this context, its loss would mean the loss of the true spiritual meaning it carried. Even after the last Crusader left the shores of the Holy Land, the knightly orders continued to play a vital role in European history, albeit in a modified form. Their military might was directed toward other fronts, and their wealth and influence continued to generate interest and controversy. But the legacy of the Crusades, including their connection to mystical quests such as the search for the Holy Grail, lived on. The fall of Acre was not just a military defeat, but also the symbolic end of an era. This event drew a line under centuries of struggle for the Holy Land, leaving behind both material ruins and a rich cultural and spiritual legacy. The knightly orders, the protagonists of this drama, either transformed or disappeared, but their stories, their exploits, and their mysteries continued to captivate people. And amidst these mysteries, like a beacon in a stormy sea, the image of the Holy Grail continued to shine, a symbol of eternal quest, hope, and something elusive that lies beyond the bounds of everyday reality. This search, begun in the heat of battle and mystical revelations, continues to this day, reminding us that true treasures are often hidden not in gold and earthly possessions, but in the depths of the human spirit. And so, as the centuries passed and the era of the Crusades gradually faded into the past, the image of the Holy Grail did not disappear. On the contrary, it lived on, transforming and finding new meaning in a changing world. It was no longer just the object of knightly deeds and religious quests, but also a powerful symbol that permeated the most diverse spheres of human culture. In popular culture, the Holy Grail became a true star. Its image began to appear in literature, painting, and then cinema. These stories reimagined ancient legends, adding new facets. For example, in the mid-20th century, when the world was experiencing new upheavals, turning to medieval myths offered a sense of stability and continuity. Writers and artists used the Grail as a metaphor for something elusive yet deeply meaningful, be it the search for truth, the attainment of wisdom, or the meaning of life. These works weren't always strictly historical, but they sparked interest in the past and the eternal questions that have perplexed people throughout history. Conspiracy theories occupy a special place in modern interpretations. The Holy Grail, shrouded in mystery and associated with powerful knightly orders, became an ideal target for such theories. Suggestions arose that the Grail was not actually a cup, but some kind of artifact possessing incredible power, or that it was linked to secret knowledge hidden from the general public. Some theories claimed that the Grail was not a Christian relic, but a legacy of ancient civilizations, or that it was linked to the lineage of Jesus Christ. These theories, although lacking a solid historical basis, demonstrate the continuing appeal of the mysteries of the past. They illustrate how people, faced with the unknown, tend to seek answers in myths and legends, giving them a new, sometimes fantastical twist. It is important to understand that these theories are typically a figment of the imagination, not the result of careful historical research. At the same time, scholarly research continues to explore the origins and evolution of the Grail legend. Historians, philologists, and art historians analyze medieval texts, attempting to understand how these stories originated and developed. They explore the connections between different versions of the legend, seeking the myth's roots in earlier traditions. For example, scholars are studying how Celtic myths about magical cauldrons may have influenced the development of the Grail, or how Christian symbolism associated with the Last Supper and the blood of Christ was integrated into these stories. Such research helps us understand not only the myth itself, but also the worldview of the people of that era, their ideas about faith, justice, and the meaning of life. Among these specific scholarly fields, the study of chivalric romances stands out. These works, such as Chrétien de Troyes' Perceval, or The Story of the Grail, or Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parsifal, are key sources for understanding how the Grail legend acquired its classical characteristics. Researchers analyze the language, style, and plot lines of these romances, as well as the context in which they were created. They examine how these texts reflected the social and cultural trends of their time, and how they influenced notions of chivalry and spiritual ideals. Furthermore, research is being conducted into possible real-life prototypes of the relics that may have served as the basis for the legend. These could include items associated with the Last Supper or other significant Christian artifacts. Scholars are studying the history of these relics, their movements, and how they were perceived by believers. However, it is important to note that most such studies focus on their symbolic meaning rather than on identifying a specific material object. Modern scholarly research also draws on archaeology and art history. Depictions of the Grail in medieval painting and sculpture are studied, and the symbols and motifs associated with it are analyzed. This allows us to see how the image of the Grail evolved over time, and how it was interpreted in various cultural contexts. For example, some researchers are studying how the Grail was depicted in works of art created outside of France and Germany in other European countries. The connection between the Grail and knightly orders such as the Templars is also being actively studied. While there is no direct historical evidence that the Templars possessed or sought the Grail, their mysterious image and wealth make them ideal candidates for various theories. Historians analyze documents related to the Templars, attempting to separate fact from fiction. They examine the order's structure, its activities, and the reasons for its downfall. Overall, modern interpretations and myths about the Holy Grail demonstrate that this ancient symbol continues to live and evolve. It remains a source of inspiration for artists and writers, a subject of interest for conspiracy theorists, and the subject of in-depth scholarly research. This multifaceted and enduring legend testifies to its universality and the fact that it touches the deepest chords of the human soul. Whether a symbol of spiritual quest or the subject of mystical theories, the Grail continues to captivate, reminding us that the past is always with us, and its secrets can reveal something new about ourselves. The Holy Grail and the Crusades, these two majestic themes, are intertwined throughout history, leaving behind a rich legacy. Our journey through the centuries has led us to understand that the search for the Grail, whether in its spiritual or material manifestation, has become for many a symbol of the striving for the highest. The Crusades, with all their complexity and contradictions, also left their mark, shaping the political map of the world and giving birth to new ideas. The era of the Crusades, which began in the late 11th century, was a time of great change. The First Crusade, from 9096 to 1909, ushered in a long period of interaction between West and East. The idea of the Holy Land, Jerusalem, became a powerful unifying force. Knightly orders, such as the Templars and the Hospitallers, also emerged during these years, their activities closely linked to the protection of pilgrims and the maintenance of a Christian presence in the East. Their bravery and selflessness became legendary, and their mystique inspired countless stories. The subsequent Crusades, the Second and Third, brought both successes and setbacks. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, established after the First Crusade, experienced periods of prosperity and decline. Historical chronicles tell of battles, strategic maneuvers, and outstanding figures such as Richard the Lionheart. It was during this period, according to some legends, that the Holy Grail was lost or hidden, which only heightened its mystical appeal. Medieval literature played a huge role in shaping the image of the Grail. Authors such as Chrétien de Troyes and Wolfram von Eschenbach created chivalric romances that became the foundation for subsequent interpretations. Their heroes, noble knights, embarked on perilous journeys to find the Grail, overcoming trials and achieving spiritual enlightenment. These works not only entertained, but also educated, conveying the ideals of chivalry, honor, and faith. The Holy Grail has always been more than just a cup. It has become a powerful spiritual symbol. For some, it is a symbol of redemption. For others, a path to divine grace. The search for the Grail has often been compared to a search for inner peace, a journey of self-knowledge. This spiritual component of the legend continues to resonate in people's hearts to this day. At the same time, the idea of the Holy Grail as a tangible artifact has never left the minds of seekers. Various locations over the centuries have been considered its possible resting place, from Valencia in Spain to Chalonnis in France. These searches, often shrouded in mystery and romance, demonstrate the enduring human desire to find something sacred, tangible, and connected to great events of the past. The connection between the Crusades and the search for the Grail is undeniable. Military expeditions aimed at liberating the Holy Land created an atmosphere in which mystical quests flourished. Knights returning from Palestine brought with them not only military experience, but also stories and legends that fueled interest in relics and mysteries. The end of the Crusades, marked by the fall of Acre in 1291, marked a turning point. The knightly orders, having lost their holdings in the East, faced new challenges. However, their legacy did not fade. The legends of the Grail, ingrained in the culture, lived on, transforming and adapting to new times. Modern times continue to reflect on the legacy of the Grail and the Crusaders. This ancient symbol finds expression in literature, cinema, and art. Popular culture creates its own versions of the legend, sometimes departing from historical reality while retaining its magic and appeal. Conspiracy theories, though not always based on fact, testify to an enduring interest in the mysteries of the past. Scientific research, in turn, seeks to separate myth from reality, using methods from history, archaeology, and art history. Studying these themes allows us to gain a deeper understanding not only of the past, but also of ourselves. The eternal attraction of the Grail and the Crusaders reminds us that humanity has always strived for something greater, for an ideal, for meaning. The lessons of history teach us to value the pursuit of knowledge, respect different cultures, and be mindful of the consequences of our actions. Thus, the Holy Grail and the Crusaders remain eternal companions in our understanding of history. Their stories, full of courage, faith, quest, and mystery, continue to inspire and provoke thought. They remind us of the complexity of human nature, of our aspirations, and that true treasure often lies not in material objects, but in the spiritual journey, in the pursuit of light and knowledge. And in this eternal quest, where reality intertwines with legend, we find a reflection of ourselves, our hopes, and our questions.